I'm Mia Simone, and I'm reading for you Where Dragons Die by Ash. The night of the new moon was a time of secrecy and espionage. A dragon-riding noble of House Fire Arrow felt ill to wait in its gloom. Both dragon and rider were on the cusp of adulthood. The man's beard was respectably thick along his chin, and his red-scaled dragon's horns had only started to curve inward. The dragon shared the noble's apprehension, and his pacing broke the night silence. The four claws of the fire dragon clacked on the galleon's bridge until his rider placed a hand on his chest to steady him. Once again, the youth could only hear the sound of the river dread splashing against the commercial boat. It was large enough to house 24 dragons in its hold, but all were empty below. The riders were out committing treason, and the youth climbed onto his dragon's saddle to commit to the same. "Remember," the young noble's brother told him, "no names." The older brother was undeniably a man and kept his face smooth. Under the red chain coif, only his intense amber eyes were visible. He covered them up with the scalp-to-chin mask of black wood with glassy mantis eyes. The younger brother took an unfamiliar full-face mask from his saddle. The single glass plane on the faceplate was cheap to make and matched the design used by riders all over the realm. The mask of his office was back at his homestead, waiting for a man of honor to wear it. The youth struggled with the unfamiliar leather straps. His brother, older and more experienced with these missions without glory, waited on his fire dragon. Scales glistened scarlet in the starry twilight, pomegranate red wings extended, and thick claws dug into the deck's edge. The coiled dragon showed no sign of straining. Such was the discipline of his brother. "Where are we going?" the youth asked in a panic. "Stay close, Sparrow," came the brother's response. Not a moment passed before his dragon vaulted down. The bat-like wings spread out, carrying dragon and rider low over the river. Sparrow could only swallow his fear and follow. They flew over moored corvettes, caravels, cutters, and cogs, waving blue banners on the top of their masts. The heraldic sword, crossing a lightning bolt, marked every ship to House Stormblade, rival to Fire Arrow. Flying into the city, the fire dragons passed between the yellow stone towers of Conquest, dashing and banking to make their way onto the wide causeways. Adult fire dragons were about the size of a hippo, with their neck more than half that length, and their wingspan thrice that. The narrow alleyways gave the dragons some trouble, but it was in their nature to fly without panache. Rear-mounted saddles kept the riders over the center of gravity, the only reasonable place to be on a creature that loved sharp turns. The 18-year-old Sparrow stood on the saddle as his dragon rose. One hand held the reins, and the other opened a belted quiver. "Tut!" Sparrow stopped himself, remembering his brother's code name. "Robin! Father told us to wait. They're taking too long." Robin kept his eyes forward, scanning the crossroads, looking for signs of a fight. Sparrow lost patience for this and ascended above the towers. Across the city, roof shops were empty, window panes were dark, and every sky stable in sight was latched closed for the night. Conquest bore distinct ballistae and war bells on the roofs of many towers. These were relics left over from the War of Dragons when Dragonguard took the land from the nearby nation of Sojourn. In the center of the city, the kneeling king statue stood as a vibrant reminder of House Fire Arrow and Stormblade's shared victory. Lightning flashed from the rooftops, lighting yellow stone walls 6 roads away. The low class of thunder was met with an orange burst of a fire dragon using its soul. Sparrow's heart jumped into his throat. He notched an arrow to his bow. "Robin!" Sparrow called out to his brothers soaring beneath the alleys. He pointed out towards the fighting with his bow. They moved northwest, towards the bank. Robin snapped the reins, bow and arrow in hand. His dragon picked up speed with a controlled dive and agitated ripple of his wings. They turned sharply. His dragon contracted to cross into a narrow alley. Sparrow grimaced but followed with bated breath. The yellow stone passed him with a rush of wind. Sparrow's dragon didn't balk. He flapped in time between the towers, following Robin without any sign of exhaustion. When the brothers finally flew over the thoroughfare, Sparrow breathed again. Lightning flashed from the other end of a corner, and the brothers turned to meet their enemies in aerial combat. Nobles from House Stormblade rode on the longer storm dragons, who could summon bolts of lightning from their gut. Of all the dragons, the storm dragon's soul was perhaps the deadliest, but this was complicated by a slew of problems. Their outward-facing teeth had trouble ripping through plates of armor. Their claws were short with smooth edges, but their electric breath was severely taxing. The warriors of House Stormblade compensated for their dragon's weakness in close combat by fighting with swords and glaives. To their noble house, swordplay was every bit as important as riding technique. Sparrow pulled onto the street behind two Stormblade dragon riders in pursuit of a fire arrow noble. The man in red wore a low-borne helm of bronze and guarded a simple parchment box with his life. Sparrow and Robin flew high behind the blue dragons and loosed a volley of arrows. At this distance, the arrowheads pierced blue metal armor and scales alike. One of the blue riders gave a hard bang into the streets, and the others stalled to meet their attackers. "Get the runner," Robin ordered. He turned his arrow on the storm dragon caught in a stall. The rider rose onto the saddle hooks and pulled a long sword out of the sheath. The sword was the length of a man's height, its tip sharper than a fire dragon's claws. Sparrow whipped the reins of his dragon. His long neck curved, his wings flapped, and the air whipped past them. The runner banked left and right, desperately trying to lose Sparrow in the narrow alleys. The short gaps in the alleys kept Sparrow from getting enough wind to overtake them. The rider held a buckler's shield on their forearm and kept his attention on Sparrow. Caught in the thin side roads, the noble of Stormblade was forced to look forward to correct their course. Sparrow took a shot, rocking him from his saddle. The arrow struck the noble right below a metal shoulder plate. Crippled, the highborn banked and ascended above the towers. Sparrow was in no position to follow. He hung on the side of his saddle and pulled his dragon into a dive. Robin would need his help, so Sparrow flew with the purpose back to the main thoroughfare. The bronze-equipped rider rose above the towers to reach soaring speed and escape the fighting. Behind Robin, a storm dragon parted its jaw, spreading arcing bolts between its teeth. Robin loosed an arrow, piercing the roof of the mouth. Dragon and rider tumbled down, crashing into market stalls closed for the night. The victory is short-lived, as more soldiers in blue pursued in the distance. Sparrow notched an arrow to assist, but the scream of a massive storm dragon locked his joints. The dragon dove in steep, screaming a challenge to men, dragons, and gods. The storm dragon was one of the largest Sparrow had ever seen. Its arms were thick with muscle and had the short, blunted claws of a male. His rider was formidably tall and adorned in helmet-free, uncolored armor. The noble of Stormblade had a stern face, a strong jaw, and murderous blue eyes. The newcomer disregarded Sparrow and turned their attention to the thief. The great male storm dragon bellowed a deep growl. The outward-facing teeth parted and streaks of electricity danced over the spikes. With force, the storm dragon threw his head down. Sparrow guarded his eyes and saw a flash through the lids. Thunder cracked the air and lightning tore stone to pebbles. The bronze-helmeted rider jerked from the impact, the parchment box thrown from his hands. Wounded and exhausted, the thief abandoned his wares and continued his escape. All of the knight's hope lied in that free-falling box. All of their betrayals would mean nothing without its capture. Sparrow went for a full dive, but he couldn't match the box's speed. There was a flash of red and orange at Sparrow's side, and for a moment he thought he'd been hit by lightning. Yet when he looked, he found his brother coming out of a soul dive. The fire dragon's neck was craned under his body, the force of his flame propelling him forward. Robin whipped at the reins with one hand and snatched the box out of the air. The brothers escaped, flying in tandem as they made their way back to the bay. With no pursuers behind them, Robin rose to toss Sparrow the box. Sparrow brought his hands out, but stopped in horror. The helmetless rider with the massive storm dragon rode in the opposite direction to meet them. In one hand, the giant brandished a traveler's sword, but carried no shield or reins in the other. He stood confidently on the fierce dragon, moving with the furious gallop of flight as if their body was one. Robin tossed the box, and within seconds he loosed an arrow. To their surprise, the helmetless warrior ducked the shot and ran over the back of his dragon. He leapt into the air and landed on the upper back of Robin's fire dragon. With a single backhanded slash, he cut Robin's bow in half. Sparrow could only helplessly watch as he secured the package. Robin fought to keep his distance, but there wasn't a lot of room to fight on the back of his dragon, and the tall warrior in gray metal had greater reach and superior strength. Sparrow readied his bow, only to find the spikes of a storm dragon's teeth headed right for him. He screamed, and the behemoth bit into him. The needle-like teeth ground against red metal plates and pressed the scales of his armor. Resistant as the armor was, it couldn't stop the raw power of this great dragon. Sparrow felt like his body was being compacted by the force of the jaw. Shallow cuts grew deeper with each moment, wrenching metal scales into his skin or shaking them free. He could feel the blood running down the inside of his doublet, but couldn't yet feel the pain. Thrashing about did nothing to free himself. The jaw pressed down to squeeze the air out of his lungs. Miraculously, the dragon let go. Sparrow was free of the teeth and jaw of the dragon, only to be thrown into the safety of the empty air. He looked around for his dragon and saw it tearing into the belly of the storm dragon. "Gleam!" Sparrow called out, not caring enough about secrecy when he was in such a precarious life-or-death situation. Gleam broke free of the brawl and dove to meet Sparrow. It caught him on the saddle, but he was so low to the ground that the dragon had to claw at the street to keep aloft. On the paved roads of conquest, Sparrow saw a red dragon curled into a ball. He landed a dozen steps away and broke into a limping run. Under the wings, Sparrow found his brother lying in the dragon's arms. Blood seeped out of an open wound on his neck. Robin was desperately trying to stop the blood flow, and his breath came out in gasps. Sparrow collapsed to his knees. Words wouldn't come. "Sparrow," Robin's voice came out in a wheeze. "What are you doing here?" "Go. Ty," Sparrow started weakly, but Robin cut him off with a shout. "No!" he screamed, and blood washed over his arm. "No names." Robin was dead. Sparrow could see it in his eyes. There wasn't time to mourn or cry, and his brother's words reminded him of that. He knelt and pulled Robin across the stone pavement. Gleam, Sparrow's fire dragon, crawled over the ground using his head to help Sparrow bring the body of his brother onto the saddle. Behind him, his brother's dragon cried out in confusion. Sparrow clenched his eyes and balled his hands into fists. The majestic creature desperately wondered what happened to his rider and partner. As a dragon ages with a human, their souls bind into one. They were more than master and pet. They were dragon and human, the two aspects of glory. "No rider," Sparrow said under his breath. The fire dragon cocked his head to the side, trying to understand his words. Sparrow spun around, pulled an arrow, and loosed it. At the short distance, the eye was easy to hit. The arrow dove deeper to the skull. The dragon thrashed about from the pain, and then its neck hit the ground with a thwack. It seized violently, picking up paved stones in its death throes. Then the dragon went still, and the night resounded with the distant sounds of battle. No dragon. This has been Where Dragons Die, written by the author Ash. I'm Mia Simone, and you can find me on Twitter at Mia S'mores, that's MIASMOORES, or on Instagram at __s'mores. We hope you'll stop by to read Chapter 2. Thank you.